This is a special edition of Chicago Tonight, a candidate forum, the Democratic primary race for governor, sponsored by WTTW Channel 11 and the City Club of Chicago, on Thursday, February 26, 1998.
Good evening, I'm John Calloway, and welcome to this special one-hour broadcast of Chicago Tonight. The Democratic primary race for governor of Illinois made front-page news this morning. Candidate Roland Burris came under attack for apparently calling his opponents, quote, non-qualified white boys, end quote. This story brings out into the open an issue which has been missing from the discussion in this campaign so far, the issue of race. And as you will see this evening, it is an issue which has many political implications. We'll also focus on education, prisons, toll roads, abortion, and other key issues in the governor's race tonight. After Chicago Tonight correspondent Elizabeth Brackett brings us up to date on the Burris controversy and provides background on all of the candidates.
The four-way race for the Democratic nomination for governor caught fire today. Frontrunner Roland Burris tried to douse it by apologizing for remarks he made earlier this year. A local cable station first aired the speech in which he appears to call his opponents unqualified white boys, though the words white boys are not audible. The video was replayed yesterday by WLS-TV.
I got 20 years experience in Illinois government. And some of those other non-qualified ought to get out. They never held a public office before.
Burris supporters say he was reflecting his frustration that after 16 years of holding statewide office, he was being called unqualified in columns like this one by the Chicago Tribune's John McCarran. McCarran suggested a Burris victory would be a disaster for Democrats because the ticket would be led by 3 African Americans. Black Talk Radio has been chewing on this column and others like it for weeks.
It always gets back to the moving of the goalposts. Historically, we wasn't qualified. Right. Now you got the most qualified person, and everybody knows if Roland Burris was white, both Madigan, Daley, Tommy Hines, everybody would be supporting Roland Burris at the top of the ticket.
So many people have been talking about the fact, well, you've got too many African Americans running. For years, we have voted for all-white ticket.
But Sun-Times political columnist Steve Neal says other Democrats on the ticket are nervous.
I think that Senator Carol Mosley Braun and Cook County Board President John Strozier, who face tough re-election fight this year, are concerned that the nomination of Burris for governor could hurt their own chances for re-election.
So do you think that will be in the back of Democratic voters' minds?
No, I don't think voters vote strategically. I think that people vote for the candidate.
Glenn Poshard is the only non-lawyer in the race. Poshard was an educator before he won a congressional seat in 1988. Labor's endorsement of Poshard has given his campaign a big boost.
I announced my candidacy. I've made 1,000 speeches from Rockford to Cairo to Moline to Danville. And there's never been a speech that I failed to mention my support for organized labor in the state of Illinois. Never a speech.
The labor endorsement was engineered by powerful Illinois House Speaker Mike Madigan, and his troops will be out in the street for Poshard, as will the forces of the neighboring ward boss, Congressman Bill Lipinski.
Glenn Poshard is the only pro-life candidate in the race. He doesn't mention his pro-life position in his ads, and he's been careful not to become a single-issue candidate. Still, his pro-life stance could hurt him in a Democratic primary where 2/3 of the voters say they're pro-choice.
I grew up in a faith and a family that believes that life begins at conception. That's what I was taught. It was taught to me by my mother. It's an issue that I struggle with all the time. I've struggled with it my whole life, but that's where I stand on it, and that's where I've been.
The Supreme Court could change at any moment the status of the basic right of choice under constitutional law. If that decision comes back to Illinois, it is going to depend on a governor to stand up to the Illinois legislature and protect the basic right of choice.
The former number 3 in the U.S. Justice Department, 54-year-old John Schmidt, has been trying to add to his liberal base by guaranteeing full tuition to any student in the state with a B average. He has also proposed abolishing the Illinois Toll Authority and toughening laws to protect the environment. He has picked up a slew of endorsements, including the Chicago Tribune. But he has not gotten the endorsement he wanted the most, one from his former boss.
John Schmidt was desperately hoping that Mayor Daley would make an endorsement in this race. He didn't need it so much for the money, because Schmidt can finance his own campaign, but he really did need it for the credibility. And Mayor Daley is historically reluctant to hitch his star to someone unless he knows that the star is going to fly.
Schmidt, the wealthiest candidate in the race, has been on TV the most with the slickest ads, primarily designed to let voters know who he is.
John Schmidt for governor.
Hi, how are you?
Hi.
Good to see you. How are you? Thank you very much.
Former U.S. Attorney Jim Burns has positioned himself as a corruption fighter and a political outsider.
It's cold out here, but I'm trying to make a point. I'm the outsider in the race for governor.
Burns, 52, was the early favorite of the professional politicians who thought he would be the best candidate to beat probable Republican candidate George Ryan. But even though he has put out solid plans to reform education and clean up state government, his message has not caught fire.
Jim Burns' problem, I think, is that, one, he was not well known. He may have assumed that he was better known because of his many press conferences as U.S. Attorney. Despite the MSI contracting scandal that hit the Edgar administration, people don't have a general idea right now that it's a cesspool in Springfield and they need to send somebody down to clean it up.
All the candidates have been hurt by the intense media coverage of the president and a former White House intern, and an unusually large number of voters are still reluctant to make up their minds.
I'm still somewhat undecided.
I think it's too soon. This is the beginning of the election.
Actually, the election is only 2.5 weeks away. Weeks the frontrunner Burris would probably like to speed up, while the others would like to stretch them out. For Chicago Tonight, I'm Elizabeth Brackett.
And now let me introduce our four candidates running in the March 17th primary election for the Democratic nomination for governor of Illinois. Glenn Poshard, United States Congressman from Illinois' 22nd District. Roland Burris, former Illinois Attorney General. John Schmidt, former Associate Attorney General in the U.S. Justice Department. And Jim Burns, former U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Illinois. And welcome all to this special broadcast of Chicago Tonight. Roland Burris, I'll begin with you, and I invite the other candidates to chime in, but you're at the top of the news, front page news in the Sun-Times today. Later, I want you and your colleagues here to get into your description of the opponents as non-qualified, but I want you to tell us why you felt compelled to refer to them in that speech as white boys.
First, John, let me point out to you that your opening piece did not touch base on one of my issues. And I think that that is a major problem with this whole campaign. You talked on their issues. You said nothing about where Roland Burris stands on any of the issues.
So we'll
what is
do
my
that
position
now.
on education? What is my position on job creation? What is my position on the information technology field? And what is my position on crime? I certainly will respond to the question that you just asked, but I want you to understand that that's what we find as a problem in media and how they now slant things. Now, in terms of the situation you just referred to, was the fact that I have been taking all types of hits and pressures on this issue of race. And why should I be running for governor? You're going to hurt the ticket. And so, and asked the question, I responded to that question. I do not have a racist or sexist bone in my body. I've hired individuals of all races and colors. I have made myself an institution of seeking to bring people together. That is the reason why I'm running for governor. But in response to that, I certainly let it be known that I am the qualified candidate. I come here with 20 years of experience, the only candidate in this race that's ever held statewide elective office in the executive branch of government. I have dealt with budgets. I have run a department and office of Illinois government.
I don't want this to go into a long speech. I watched a good bit of that speech on cable access one night when it was broadcast. I did not see the reference to white boys. I didn't see that part. But what I did see was a different Roland Burris than I see during the mainstream media, and I saw you talking to an African-American audience and really hitting hard on the notion that it's us against them and that there are white folks out there, in effect, conspiring to keep you, a well-qualified state officer from getting into power?
If you look at what the hits that I've taken from the Chicago Tribune and this columnist, one called me a hack. One said that the mayor and the Speaker of the House ought to get together to stop the disaster. I mean, I think right-minded people across the state really resent that. And therefore, it's all been, perpetrated on because of the color of my skin. Look, God gave me this. I had absolutely nothing to do with this, and therefore we should not judge anyone in this state based on race, creed, or color. And
I've been getting calls all day from people saying, what do you think would have happened if one of these candidates had referred to you as a black boy?
Well, there's a difference in that, John, because the negative connotation that boy has in the black community, because we were subservient, we were slaves, and that was a derogatory term by the white community that put blacks down. And that connotation and using it in boy there, we say boy all the time in playing ball, let's go get him, boy, let's go get him. And so it was a bad choice of a word in those circumstances. But in terms of the racial connotation, if you say boy to a black person because of the racism in this society in the past, that would have been a very, very derogatory term, and therefore it has to be with the intent that is meant. And there was no intent meant, and I certainly apologize to my colleagues for it, and I think we're going to put a stop to it, and I don't think I'll spend too much time on this particular program on the issues, John.
Mr. Schmidt?
I accept completely that Roland is not in any sense racist. I think we all understand that. But I do think it is wrong for any candidate to refer to any other candidate or candidates in racial terms. We do not want race as part of this campaign for governor. We want to unite our state. And anybody who has lived in this city through a period when we had a divisive, racially oriented politics knows the dangers in that. And I know Roland shares that. So I think, there is a lesson here. I think it's important for all of us not to allow race to become an element in this campaign. And I do think, whatever the pressures you're under, I think it is wrong when you start characterizing another candidate or other candidates in terms of their race.
Race does not belong in this campaign. Now, Roland and I were together at a function this morning supporting managed care and a Bill of Rights for managed care. And he apologized to me this morning, and I accepted that apology. But I think what we need to be talking about here is inclusion, not exclusion. We don't need to be engaging in divisive rhetoric. We want to bring Illinois together, make it one state to the extent that we can. And I think that we want to avoid any language, but I did take issue, and I've told Roland this, and I repeated it. I took issue with him talking about my qualifications, and I have said...
And we'll get to that.
Okay.
Mr. Poshard.
And John, certainly, as Roland himself indicated, it was an unfortunate choice of words. Race doesn't belong in any campaign. He apologized. I've been involved in many campaigns now. I've cast votes where people have said much worse things to me over the kinds of votes that I've cast. And I think you have to understand that there's no one at this table that's a racist. And we just need to get on with the campaign now. The apology has been offered. We've accepted it. And there are other issues to talk about.
But I'll tell you where race is an issue, and I don't think you ought to duck it, and Mr. Burris has already commented on it, and I want him to comment on it again, because now it moves to the other area, which he called his opponents non-qualified. Because what his supporters said today, and we ought to just talk about it, is if Roland Burris were white, with his record in state government, we wouldn't be having this primary race. The suggestion is the mayor would be behind him, the powers that be would be behind him, and we'd never have this discussion. Now, there's a racial issue. Mr. Burris? You agree?
I'll leave it up to you, John.
What do you say?
Well, to suggest the mayor would be behind him, last election, Roland ran against the incumbent Democratic mayor of Chicago as a third-party candidate. So to suggest that somehow he is
but I mean the power structure, that he wouldn't have this kind of
John,
struggle if he were
white.
I do resent, and I know Jim and Glenn do too, the suggestion that we are somehow less qualified. In terms of management experience, in terms of having run and led large-scale government enterprises, I would put my record up against Roland any day of the week.
Well, that's what you're doing right now.
It isn't elective office that matters alone. It's holding large-scale public office. I led the biggest public projects in the history of this state. I went to Geneva as the chief United States negotiator for the biggest trade agreement in world history.
I went to the Justice Department,
and I led the largest and most effective anti-crime programs in the history of this state. So to suggest that you are better qualified in some some sense that somehow
It is.
entitles
I
you
have
to
20
the
years of
nomination, I don't
experience in
think is the
Illinois
correct
government,
statement.
running the Department of General Services, which is the operation of Illinois government, all of the purchasing, all of the leasing. I ran the finances of the state for 12 years, the chief financial officer. I ran the legal operation of the state for 4 years. No one has 20 years experience in Illinois government. So when it comes to knowledge of Illinois government, Senator Glenn was a state senator. He has some knowledge in the executive branch of government. But in terms of what I was speaking of, in terms of the executive branch of government, none of my colleagues, he's saying that he is not a lawyer.
But it's just wrong. The
Attorney
General...
Let Mr. Poshard come in.
It's not wrong. It's
Let
right.
Mr. Poshard come in.
It's absolutely right, John.
The point is that we're all qualified. The people are going to have to choose which of us they feel are best qualified to lead the state in the future. I've served in the Illinois State Senate. I've chaired the Labor and Commerce Committee. I've been in the United States Congress in my 10th year now. I've cast thousands of votes. I'm the only one in this race who's ever cast a single vote. So all of us have strengths, all of us have weaknesses, and the public is just going to have to ferret that out as to who they think can be the best leader for the state.
And are you qualified? You're described as a non-qualified guy by your opponent.
Well, I told Roland I disagree with him. Of course I'm qualified.
Or else you wouldn't be running, right? You would be out there.
And I will say loudly and clearly, any day of the week, I'll take my record as United States Attorney, pit it against his record as Illinois Attorney General, and let the voters decide on that one issue alone. That, even though it's an appointed position, is an executive position. I ran one of the largest federal prosecutor's offices in the country, and I ran it very well. Had to engage in all the management skills that are necessary. We cracked down on corruption. We cracked down on waste, fraud, and inefficiency. We went after the big gangs. We did the day-to-day law enforcement work that was absolutely critical to the Northern District of Illinois. And to say that I'm not qualified, I couldn't disagree more.
Well, you ran a local prosecutor's office. I ran about half the Justice Department, including
John,
a $30 billion anti-crime program, which is about 1,000 times the size of the Attorney General's office. So to suggest that there's somehow a difference in qualifications, I just don't think is defensible.
Mr. Burns.
John, I've been listening to you through this campaign talk about what you did with the Department of Justice.
You mean John Schmidt?
John Schmidt. And he, as Associate Attorney General, was in charge of the civil division. Yeah. Yet you listen to him talk about what he was doing in criminal law. Janet Reno must have taken a 2-year vacation while he was in the Department of Justice.
All right, now, wait
a minute. The day the crime bill was signed into law by the president,
the
the Attorney General announced publicly that she and the president had asked me to take responsibility for all aspects of its implementation. That was a $30 billion anti-crime program. It required me to set up the COPS program, the Violence Against Women program. Those are programs that I took from words on a piece of paper into reality in communities all across this country.
I have one other issue that I want to raise with respect to race, and then we'll go to education, prisons, and other issues. And that is that there is a great deal of political commentary that says that you candidates have been going at each other but taking it easy on Roland because you don't want to alienate black voters in the general election, and therefore you're going to give Roland a pass most of the time, tonight perhaps accepted. And the suggestion is that that is the most insidious form of racism of all, that it's patronizing and that it's really insidious.
John, are you saying that there's a problem with the agreement that we made that we would not do negative campaigning against each other? That is the agreement. We're going to come together.
That's a different issue.
No, we're going to come together on March 18th, the morning, whoever the winner, we made a pledge that we would be there at a breakfast, ready to rally to do what hasn't been done in this state in 22 years, and that's to elect a Democratic governor. I made that pledge. I will stick by that pledge. If by chance I am not the nominee, which I don't intend not to be, I will be the nominee.
But I want to get your comment, your political, analytical comment on that, because you've been reading it in the papers.
It's false. I've confronted Roland directly. We've had some pretty tough arguments about issues like the third airport. We had an exchange the other night over who has demonstrated leadership on gun control. I'm not reluctant to confront Roland on any issue in the world, nor is he reluctant to confront me.
I think we've had several differences on major issues, John. I, for one, want to get my issues out and my qualifications out. I feel like, being the only one from downstate, I need to talk about more of my experience here in Chicago so that people get to know me better.
Let's go to it. If at the end of this evening there is any one issue, Mr. Poshard, that you want the voters to know that distinguishes you from the other three opponents. What is it?
Campaign finance reform. I'm the only person in this race that is not taking PAC and special interest money. I haven't taken it for the 9.5 years that I've been in the United States Congress. I set the standards early by embracing the Stratton-Simon Commission report, which basically limits contributions from individuals to $2,000, from PACs and corporations to the same. It limits contributions from leadership PACs, full disclosure, and so on. Everybody else talks about it. I'm the only person that's living by that standard because I believe that money is overwhelming the system. We've seen the leadership of both parties at both levels of government admit that, but we can't pass it because people, when it comes right down to it, won't practice what they preach.
But Glenn, the Speaker of the Illinois House is now channeling money into your campaign in $25,000 chunks from committees all over the state that take PAC money.
Are you
so to suggest you're not taking PAC money
let me tell you something.
Is really...
If you want to argue with Senator Simon and former Governor Stratton over their recommendations for campaign finance reform, go argue with them.
They didn't say that you shouldn't take PAC money. You're the one that said you weren't going to take PAC money.
Let's get Mr. Burris on this.
They said that there should be limitations on leadership PACs, which traditionally give $400,000, $500,000 to candidates. Our rule is that as long as the money in those PACs is given by individuals which equal what they've given to us, that's what we take and not a penny more.
How do you know which money you're getting?
Because
Mr. Burris, where are you?
How do you know whether you're getting the PAC money or the individual money?
Let's get some other candidates in. Mr. Burris.
If there is some PAC money out there, I accept PAC money. I accept corporate money. I accept personal money. I accept any money that is legitimate under the rules of the Illinois State Election Board.
And you don't want to change those rules?
And I would change the rules, but right now I'm not in the middle of changing those rules because I need the dollars. And my campaign is being funded with $5, $10, $50, and $100. So any PACs that my buddy Glenn doesn't take, and we're good buddies, please tell him to send it to me.
All right, Mr. Burns.
John, I favor campaign finance reform. I have spoken loudly about it throughout the entire campaign. I said in this campaign I would play by the rules and play by them strictly. I have. Glenn, the funneling of political committee monies to you, I'm not going to accuse you of a crime, but it's almost money laundering the way it's laundered through. And I don't.
Would you, if you were a U.S. attorney, would you be examining it?
No, I'm not saying that, and I'm not saying that there's anything. Glenn, here's the point.
Let him finish. Let him finish.
It's the appearance is what I'm talking about. The fact that you stand in almost every debate, every time we're together, every discussion, and you take a position that you're living government reform. When I've come out with a very comprehensive plan on reforming government ethics, cleaning up business as usual in Springfield, and you always use as your example what you're doing is not taking PAC money. We all know in state elections, PAC money doesn't play a whole lot of a role because there are no restrictions on
I want to give another
corporations.
candidate a chance to answer my question. Mr. Schmidt, if there's any one thing at the end of this evening you want the voters to really understand about you that differentiates you from your colleagues, what would it be?
I would want them to know that I have a record of commitment and leadership in support of the right of choice for the women of Illinois. I think that is a central issue for large numbers of voters. I think it is critical that we have a governor who stands for the right of choice because we have and are likely to continue to have an anti-choice legislature led by the Speaker of the House who's now helping Glenn in his gubernatorial campaign. So I think we need a governor who stands for the right of choice. There's a reason why I've been endorsed by every pro-choice group in the state of Illinois. It's because I not only say I'm pro-choice, I have a record of having demonstrated leadership and commitment on that issue.
Is there any, Mr. Poshard?
John, I think it's disappointing to me that John and others have portrayed my position as anti-woman in this campaign. There are tens of thousands of women in this state who disagree with me on this issue. There are tens of thousands of women who agree with me on the issue. But there are many thousands, even those who disagree with me, that support me because they know that I'm the candidate in this race that has stood up for many of the issues which women care about deeply. I'm the one here that supported the Family and Medical Leave Act to help women balance the needs of their families against the needs of their jobs. I'm the one that stood up for the crime bill not John Schmidt, voted for the crime bill that had the anti-stalking legislation in it, that had the anti-violence against women in it. I'm the one that's voted every time for expanded child care, for expanded daycare, $10 billion in the budget that we supported for the children of the state who have no health care. I support the minimum wage. The least paid people in our workforce today are the women. They're the lowest paid. I voted for those kinds of things, and I stand on those. My record in favor of support of women's issues is solid.
Mr. Burns, is there any one issue that you want the voters at the end of this hour tonight to know that is central about you, that distinguishes you from your opponents?
It's a combination, John. I have, throughout this campaign, said that I will clean up business as usual in Springfield. I will go after ethics in terms of how government is run in Springfield. I will come forth. I have a comprehensive plan on improving the quality of education for all school children all over the state of Illinois. And I will take my U.S. Attorney's background to the governor's position, and I will do everything in my power to make our streets safer. It's very simple. I'm talking about better government, I'm talking about better schools, and I'm talking about safer streets.
Mr. Burris, is there any one thing that you want the viewers at the end of this program to go away with that distinguishes you, that's a centerpiece issue for you in this campaign?
Absolutely. And that's funding our schools and also having education reform in the state of Illinois. And funding those schools would mean that the state of Illinois would finally live up to its responsibility to putting the dollars into education. When Jim Thompson came into office in 1977, the state of Illinois was funding 48% of the cost of education. When he left, it was 37%. Then comes Jim Edgar, who says he's going to be the education governor, and he's going to really put the dollars in. Well, now, after 7 years out, it got down to 32%. That had put the responsibility on the local property taxes. Local property taxes had to be raised in order for the school districts to get the dollars to cover their inflation. I'm saying that that's a responsibility of the state, and as governor of this state, I will put the dollars in according to my fair funding plan. I will put a minimum of $300 million into the Common School Fund. We've already got the tax increase now that's going to produce $600 million. We spend $12 billion to educate 1.9 million children in this state. Of that $12 billion, $7 billion of it comes from the property taxes. I would freeze those property taxes at $7 billion. And of course, there's a lot of dollars coming into Springfield right now, and I probably can give property tax relief. But I'm not going to promise that yet until I get the governor's chair.
So your $300 million comes out of the budget?
It comes out of the revenue growth, it comes out of the budget, and we will do that each year. And by year 2002, we will be at about $14 billion for the cost of education, and the state will be up to its 50% level. We've frozen the $7 billion from the property taxes, and then at the second term, you will see the net scale sliding just the opposite. We should be paying 64 to 65% of the cost of our schools through the general funds or through the state government and not through our local property taxes. It is the most unfair way that we could fund schools in this state.
All right, now clearly this is a critical issue, and so I want each and every other candidate. Is there anything about this plan?
But no, I did not finish, by the way.
Tack on another paragraph.
No, but it's the reform side of it too. I mean, we're not just talking about dollars.
Oh, okay, all right, we'll come back to that. But on funding,
sure.
Speak up if there's anything where you either take exception or you want to add something about your own concern that would add on to your colleagues' education centerpiece plan.
Well, I have said I think we've got to go beyond grade school and high school. I think it's time in this state to make a commitment to give to every high school student who graduates with a B average or better a guaranteed scholarship to a community college or a state college or university. That is a plan that is in effect now in the state of Georgia. It is working well. It is fundable out of our existing tax revenues if we will make the commitment to do it.
How much?
I think it sends about $140 million a year by the time we are 4 years into it.
And how many kids would get the benefit?
About 75,000 by the time we're fully into it. And the key to it is it sends the right message. It sends a message to high school students all across this state. If you work hard, if you study hard, we will reward you with the opportunity to go to college. And I think we should take that step. We can afford to do it. And I think, Illinois is ready for it. The business community in Georgia is one of its biggest supporters.
How do you guard against grade inflation?
It hasn't happened in Georgia. It hasn't happened partly because of the integrity, I think, of school systems. And there's another protection. You only get to keep the scholarship if you maintain a B average during your 4 years in college. So the best you can get out of grade inflation is 1 year.
Okay. Mr. Burns, is there anything that you can add to the menu to better education in this state?
Yes, John and I fundamentally disagree. I think that the focus absolutely has to be on primary and secondary education. I disagree with his plan. I think it will be enormously expensive. I'm concerned about grade puffing, and I think it sends the wrong message. We are doing well in Illinois in terms of helping school children in need get to college, and I think we need to continue to do everything we can to encourage children to go to college and help as far as funding is concerned. But his plan would be a tremendous advantage for upper middle class and rich kids. And what I want to do is make sure that we're taking our resources and we're focusing on primary and secondary education. That's why with my plan, I start preschool, then we talk about kindergarten through
How do you
third grade.
finance your plan, and how much does it cost?
We are going to finance it through revenue growth, and I was the first candidate to start talking about revenue growth as a realistic
Don't say
way.
that. I said that in 1994.
I don't think you can get away with that.
Wait. Okay, all right. So you want revenue growth as opposed to tax increases?
Roland originally started talking about moving numbers around
All
in
right,
the budget.
thank you very much.
cutting
Mr.
waste.
Poshard,
Yes.
is there anything that you would add
John,
to
in
the
19
education reform?
In 1987, I submitted a bill, a bipartisan bill, to the Illinois State Senate to change funding from education from the personal property taxes to the state income tax. Because as a matter of simple justice, it seems to me that the quality of a child's education should not depend upon where that child happens to be born or raised. We all in this state, we're one people, we're all Illinoisans. We have a corporate responsibility for our children no matter where they live. And if they're failing, that responsibility to help them succeed belongs to all of us. I favored what the governor finally came around to support because I had already favored an exchange in funding from the property tax to the state income tax.
You mean the Don Clark Netsch proposal before that the governor jumped all over?
Which the governor jumped over in '94 and then endorsed in '96, because what needs changing here is systemic funding change. That's the only way we're going to close the disparity in the gap.
Are you the only candidate calling for that?
Yeah,
I'm not sure if I am or not.
Well,
but
let me
wait a
answer that.
second, John.
I mean, because remember, it was
should
going to
get to
be
finish
permanent,
my-
fair funding, and then it's like, oh, we got all this new revenue in, so we'll just do it out of that, and we'll come back to property tax reform. Oh, in about the year 2009.
John, I said in 1994, and I ran for governor, that plan would not work. It did not work. It has not passed. And to replace $7 billion of property taxes with a swap would be an income boondoggle for the people of the state.
So you're clearly against it.
It would take years to do it.
You wanted to follow it.
The plan absolutely will work. The plan passed the Illinois State House. It had the support in the Illinois State Senate and was killed in a state Senate committee. But it had 65% of the support of the public in every poll that was run. And it is, whether it's popular or not, to talk about it politically, it is the only systemic change that will, over the long haul, close the disparity in funding between those children that have those unsuccessful education experiences and the ones that have $15,000 a year spent on their education.
I favor an effort to shift. I favor an effort to shift some of the burden from the property tax to the income tax. I supported Jim Edgar's plan, which would have done that to a limited degree with a 25% income tax increase. I thought that was a little bit too high. But I think there is a difference here, and I tried to confront it the other night, and Glenn got angry with me. But the plan that Glenn introduced 12 years ago was a plan that would have increased the Illinois income tax by 80%, from 2.5% to 4.5%, and completely eliminated property taxation as a basis for funding the schools. And I do not favor that, and I have yet to get a straight answer on whether you still do favor it. But I don't think that is the way to go.
Let's get a straight answer.
John, the net increase in what we proposed between the reduction in the property tax in '87 and the increase in the income tax was 7%, or an additional $100 million that went to education. What the governor proposed and I supported was a 15% difference, or a net increase between the two swaps of about $400 to $600 million.
But there's
It's
a
getting
big...
It's getting tough to follow on TV. It's like I want to get a printout of all of this and study it.
But John, there is one point that I am concerned about on higher education, and that's what a governor must deal with, and that's our public institutions constantly raising tuition. We're pricing our students out of the educational market.
As governor, what could you do about that?
And we're definitely going to look at those dollars that would go in where the universities will not be able to raise their tuition beyond the minimum inflationary rate, and that's what we're looking at.
Quick comment.
Yes, I hear the arguing here about who's for what tax and who's the bigger taxer. I have said throughout that my plan to improve the quality of education can be done by revenue growth. Here in Illinois, we've been running well over 5% over the last 10 years average in terms of revenue growth, and it's been 5.75% the last 5 years. We pegged our plan at 3% revenue growth, a very, very conservative number.
So you could take a bit of a dip economically.
Yes, and we would dedicate 50% of those monies to my plan to improve the quality of education. It's very doable, John. Other states have done it. Illinois can too.
Let me follow up with you, and then I want everybody else to answer this question. Do you foresee, given what you know now, any circumstances under which, if you were elected governor of Illinois, that you would call for an increase in any taxes or any state fees? Or any new taxes or new state fees?
As I sit here now, I do not, and I certainly don't
Mr.
see
Schmidt?
any.
I would not favor any net increase. The one thing I would favor is a dollar-for-dollar swap with some reduction in property taxes in exchange for some increase in the income tax to fund education.
I've been in this business long enough, John, to know that you never say never in this business. And by the way, I have supported tax increases, and I have been against tax increases as comptroller of this state. And when you look at what happened when those tax increases were either passed or defeated, the comptroller was on the right side of the issue.
Given what you know now, though, do you see the need to call for any tax or fee increases or new taxes or fees?
What I know now and what I see happening to the economy, we do not have to do that. And based on the revenue growth that we have, I'm even putting forth creating a rainy day fund. We have to take some of that $750 million surplus we're going to have and move it over to the rainy day fund and build that fund up to at least $1 billion. If Indiana, a third our size, can have $1 billion rainy day fund and they can cut educational funding, Illinois ought to be able to do the same thing. As governor of the state, I would do that.
Mr. Poshard, do you see any circumstances under which you would raise taxes or increase or create new fees?
We're either going to have to make permanent the sin taxes that were just passed if we're going to continue this revenue stream for education in the future, and I would certainly consider that if we're not able to make the systemic change in the swap between the property tax and the net increase in the income tax.
I want to go to the issue. I want to go to the issue of prisons, and that is that there has been, over the past 20 years, all of this talk about lock them up, and we've built lots of prison cells, etc., even while we've struggled with education funding. And almost all of those persons in prison will come out, and they'll hit the streets again. And there are many observers who are worried about the gangs having ownership of the prisons doing nothing except sending people out more bitter than ever, trained criminals, and that we're just sitting on top of a time bomb in the state of Illinois and in other states. Mr. Burns, I want to ask you if you acknowledge the premise of that question, and if so, what would you do about it if you were governor?
I acknowledge it, John. I saw the problems firsthand as United States Attorney. When we prosecuted the gangster disciples, I saw how Larry Hoover was able to run a $100 million a year drug empire from inside the prison system. He'd been locked up since 1972 on a murder beef, and he was able to run that because the gangs had substantial control. Now, what I have proposed in my prison reform plan is that we monitor carefully the gang members when they come in, find out who they are, what gang they belong to. We've got to break up this domination of cells where gangs will dominate a single cell and disperse the gang members throughout the state or throughout the prison.
And you think you know how to do that?
Yes, and I also think that with the gang leaders, the big leaders, we can enter into contracts with other states or with the federal government to get them out of Illinois so they can't do what Larry Hoover has done. But it would seem to me that we've also got to focus on other things. We right now have roughly 39 to 40% of our prisoners, when they leave the Illinois prison system, they are rearrested or back in within 3 years. We've got to stop that revolving door. We can do it through more education, working towards GEDs, and I think in particular, drug and substance abuse programs have to be stepped up because a great number of the problems stem from the very basic addiction problem of drug and substance abuse.
Mr. Poshard.
John, systemic change in this area demands that we address education in our communities and more opportunities for people, especially in higher unemployment communities. But I now have as many prisons in my congressional district as we have community colleges. And that speaks to the lack of appropriate priorities we've had in the last 22 years in the government of the state. My plan for prisons When people come into prison, these 18-year-old children that we've had trouble rehabilitating, surround them with a group of people that includes an educator, a job trainer, a counselor. Say to them, you're not going to get color television sets in the cells. You're not going to get to wear your own clothes. You're not going to get to have picnics on the ground with the family and so on, unless you merit those things through self-improvement. You're going to be in classes 3 hours a day to get the GED or maybe the associate. You're going to go to job training to learn a skill so that you're more productive when you come out of here. You're going to be with a counselor to learn why you're in here to begin with, why you lack self-esteem, why you've come to this place, so that when you come out of these prison walls, you're going to be more capable of being a more productive citizen on the outside. But you must earn these amenities in the prisons. We're not going to babysit with you here for 5 years and turn you out in a worse shape than you came in.
Mr. Burris.
John, this state has built 17 prisons in 18 years. We have 2 on the drawing boards, which means we will do 19 prisons in 19 years, which will house 40,000 people, 80% of which drug-related. 80% of them would be without a high school diploma, and 65% of them are African American. There is a problem, and it's a problem generated primarily over the past 22 years. That's the reason why we need a new governor with a new direction that's going to talk about the environment in which these communities are operating. We talk about education, we talk about family values, and we talk about jobs. These individuals have to get all this training and all, where do they go to? Where do they get the opportunity to be challenged from? We have to create some jobs. I was down in Robert Taylor Homes the other day and talking to some of the people on the streets there. And they say there's a bread factory right across the street. Even if I were skilled, I could not walk over to the bread factory and get a job. We have to do something about jobs in this community as we locate them in the community or out in the other suburban areas. They don't have transportation to get there. They don't have daycare to get to those jobs. And as governor of this state, that's what I will be doing, and we will have less people in prison.
Mr. Schmidt.
I think there are 2 very concrete things we can do. One is we can stop gang leaders from operating within our prisons by isolating known gang leaders from the rest of the prison population and cutting them off from access to the outside world. We can do that. The prison authorities have the authority to do it. They are reluctant to do it, frankly, because they have gotten used to allowing the gangs to dominate our prisons. But it is intolerable, and I talk to police officers, police chiefs all around this state. They find it intolerable that they go out, they risk their lives, they arrest gang leaders, they go to prison, and they continue gang activity out of prison. But the second thing is equally important. We can stop gang leaders from resuming gang activity when they go back into the communities with a targeted task force of parole officers who will enforce tough conditions of release. This has been done in other places. Boston has done this. I'm talking about conditions like curfews to keep gang leaders from going back on the streets at night, geographical restrictions to keep them from going back into their neighborhoods. We can say to gang leaders, we are not going to allow you to resume gang activity. Boston did this. They have achieved a remarkable statistic. In a 2-year period, not a single juvenile homicide in the city of Boston, because they have effectively broken the back of the gangs in Boston, and we can do that.
Gentlemen, you've given us, I think, some really good in-depth answers on race, on education, on prisons. You've explained what differentiates you. You've got key issues that you spoke to. One of the things that we did last night that we had favorable response to, we had a part of the program where we kind of went through several issues fairly quickly, even though any one of you could make a 2-hour speech on any one of these issues. Let's try and do that now for a minute. Let's try and get some quickies in and see if we can give the voter or the viewer a chance to just see where you are on this. Now, I want to follow up on crime. Capital punishment.
I'm for it.
You're for it.
I support capital punishment.
I support capital punishment.
I support it.
Third airport.
I don't think you can do it unless you can get the big airlines to support it, and they are not only not supportive, they are hostile to it at this point.
Third airport.
It is not economically viable. The airlines, other businesses and industries such as hotels, restaurants, motels, nobody's interested at this point in time. We must build towards a regional consensus, get a final solution on our air transportation needs in the future.
And I definitely can speak 3 hours on this subject. We're going to build a third airport. We need it. And the O'Hare right now, you can't get into it. Even American Airlines, my buddy Hood over there, is now going to Midway to start landing his planes. The slots are slotted. Now they can get to Tokyo, and you can't even get to Decatur. As governor of this state, we're going to build that third airport out in South Suburban, and we're not going to do it on the backs.
You're going to do it in Peatone?
That's correct. We're not going to do it on the backs of the taxpayers. We're going to go after the federal money, and we're going to do it with some of that $3 that they're charging a head. It's going to go to American and United. My buddy Greg over there is getting rich with those dollars for United building all that repair stuff. So we're going to do that.
Mr. Poshard.
I sit on the aviation subcommittee in the Congress. I believe a third metropolitan airport will be needed in this area in the next 5 to 10 years. I don't think the Peatone location is the location where it can be built right now. It will require a regional consensus with the mayor of this city agreeing with the suburban mayors on, first of all, a shared governance system and how we move forward in buying this. But the important thing here is we should not purchase 1 acre of land out there until we know who owns the land in that area. And right now, it's all in a blind trust.
I just want to follow up on capital punishment. I want to put the question a different way. There are those who are so worried about all of these cases where we've been just about to send the wrong person to death, and they're calling for a moratorium to see if we can think about this a little more. Would you favor a moratorium?
No, I don't. I think we've got to look at each case individually. I don't think we should have an across-the-board prohibition.
Would you be okay with a moratorium on it?
No, I would look at each case individually, but I would look at it the way the federal system does it. The federal system is very effective in screening the cases up front before the case is actually charged.
And we don't do a good enough job at the state level on that?
In my opinion, no. What I experienced as U.S. Attorney in a capital case, you start in the U.S. Attorney's office. The defense lawyers come in, you all sit down, you discuss the case, they pitch the case. If a decision is made to go for capital punishment, then they have the opportunity. We all go to Washington and meet with the Attorney General and her staff, and we go through it again. It is very carefully screened before charging.
Would you be okay with a moratorium to study this situation?
I have been there as the Attorney General of this state. I have to argue all of those appeals of the death sentence. And unfortunately, the trial records, and I've seen trial records where there's been perjured testimony, there has been fraudulent investigations by local officials.
We have all kinds of stories
and those
like
types of things, and that's what we have to be very careful
of. Well, would you call for a moratorium then on the death penalty?
I'm not calling for a moratorium on the death penalty, but I am calling for more time to make sure that we do not wrongfully put anyone to death in this state.
Are you concerned about that?
I do not believe in a moratorium. I do believe it's an individual case-by-case basis, but I think the federal process has a better chance of being successful and more accurate in the way that it's accomplished.
All right, and then quickly, is there anything that distinguishes you from your colleagues in this? Let's go around on gun control.
Well, I think I'm the only candidate with a real record of leadership in support of strong gun control. It's something I devoted my life to in Washington. I've set out a whole series of proposals. My rivals have taken to putting out press releases saying they agree with me. But the issue isn't what you say in a campaign.
Give us a couple of things you want to do.
I want to ban the sale in Illinois of any assault weapon, regardless of when it was manufactured.
What else?
I want to close the loopholes that allow massive quantities of handguns to be sold at gun shows without background checks and waiting periods.
You want child safety locks?
I do want child safety locks. I want a prohibition on anybody buying more than 1 handgun in a 30-day period. But again, let me just say, the key isn't what you say in a press release. The key is who is going to take on the NRA, fight the gun lobby in Springfield as I fought them in Washington. That is the question.
Okay. Mr. Burns.
Well, John, we don't disagree on much in terms of guns. John Schmidt and I do. Glenn and I do disagree in terms of...
You say John Schmidt and you do not disagree.
No, because I was a very strong supporter of the assault weapons ban.
So is everything he just mentioned, are you okay with?
Well, but the difference is, again, he's talking about Washington and making it sound like that he was doing everything in the world as far as guns were concerned, and I didn't see that while I was U.S. Attorney. What I was doing was hands-on every day, fighting the big gangs, fighting the drugs, and fighting how they use guns and all the senseless killings, going after gun runners. You know, we are a major net importer of guns here. I support the Virginia 1 gun a month law and think it ought to be federal law, because Virginia looked at it and realized a lot of these handguns were ending up in New York, in Philadelphia, in Boston, in the hands of gangbangers.
Mr. Burris, anything on guns that you would do that's beyond and above what you do?
Well, certainly, number one, and keep this in mind, is also as Attorney General, I ran the most successful gun turning program in the country, and of course had states to model after the guns. And to my good friend John Schmidt here, who reminds me that I didn't turn my own gun in. In fact, I did, based on getting the program together, I did call up Superintendent Rodriguez and say I was busy trying to get my program off and go to all these stops, and I did turn my gun in.
Months later.
But it was turned in.
When the Tribune called the issue to your attention.
What were you doing with the gun?
I had the gun for safety in my home, and I also learned, and this is the phrase that
you feel unsafe in your home?
Hold on, John. I also learned that you must remember that a gun is more likely to hurt someone that you love than someone that you fear. And based on that, I've gotten rid of my handgun, and I have a very strong gun program in terms of tracing the guns. We have to get past the wholesaler, the retailer, the point of user, and then we must continue to trace. And my program would say that you trace that gun all the way through. I cannot sell a gun to you unless it goes through a gun dealer and we identify that that gun has been sold to you. And then we do the same thing with automobiles. We have to do that with guns so we can stop these guns going into the hands of these juveniles and stop people coming buying 400 guns down in Kentucky and come selling them on the streets of Chicago, or on the streets of East St. Louis, or the streets of Winnetka.
Mr. Poshard.
John, I've said that I oppose concealed carry. I know that's a big issue before a lot of people in this state now. I have supported child safety locks. I call for a safe storage program for guns all over the state. I said on your program the last time that I was on the program that I thought I made a mistake voting in support of assault weapons, and that as governor of this state I would advocate for a strong assault weapons ban. I have been endorsed by the Chicago Federation of Police, by the Metropolitan Area Police, because of my strong law enforcement record over many years on many issues. I supported the COPS program. I supported the Violence Against Women's Act, the 1994 crime bill, and that included hundreds of issues that law enforcement brought to the table to the United States Congress.
Do you own guns?
I do not.
Does anybody else here own guns?
No.
Can I just, Glenn, everyone knows the Federation of Police endorsed you because you were prepared to stand up with them and say you disagree with Mayor Daley's affirmative action program for the Chicago Police Department. They said they were doing it in spite of your record on guns, not because
John,
of it.
that is absolutely untrue. That is
what
absolutely untrue.
That is what they said.
John, I'm the one voted for the crime bill, not you. You came to the Justice Department. Listen, John. You came to the Justice Department.
That's right, and I'm the one
2
that took it
weeks.
from words on paper into reality across this country.
You came to the Justice Department 2 weeks before we passed a crime bill that we've been working on for 2 solid years, and you've taken credit for the COPS program,
never
the
taken credit
Violence
for
Against
passing
Women
the crime
program,
bill,
and
but I have
everything
taken
else.
credit for
when you had nothing to do with it.
Thank you. Now, there is another set of issues which we could go for hours on, but I want you at least touch base on it. And that is, in addition to the hundreds of thousands of persons in this state who are among the 35 to 40 million Americans who do not have health insurance, there are those who feel like the medical decisions that are being made in so-called managed care are being made by accountants as opposed to by physicians in terms of what the real needs are made. And I think it's fair to say that if any one of you is elected governor, that you will be governor during a period of time in which there's going to be a huge set of examinations on managed care and health insurance at the state level. Is there anything that you've got to say that would give us a clue as to what you would do?
Yes, it's a central issue, and I think anybody who goes around and talks to people around this state knows there's nothing you hear more concern about than HMOs. I've proposed an HMO Bill of Rights to give to every participant in an HMO a set of rights, the right to be advised of alternative treatments that might be available, even if that HMO won't pay for them.
Would that be backed up in law?
It would be put into law, and what I have said is I would seek to do it by legislation. But if the Illinois legislature won't pass it, I would put in place a director of insurance who would put it in place by administrative action. Most of it could be done by administrative action.
Mr. Burris.
We were out to the press conference this morning with Dr. Young and Pat Quinn in terms of the Healthcare's Bill of Rights, and we certainly support that. We need to make sure that those HMOs are not doing care.
Would that be a high priority for you and your administration?
It would be a major priority, because right now you have the insurance companies dictating as to what medical care is going to be. And when you have doctors talking about they're going to form a union, you know we're in trouble, because the doctors have to organize in order to strengthen themselves against the insurance companies to make sure they're delivering health care.
John, we put forth the first Patient's Bill of Rights in this campaign that included the carrier's responsibility, the individual's responsibility, emergency room stipulations, prior notification for hospital use, appeal processes, and so on. But the issue is even greater than that. A large part of this state is medically underserved. We need more doctors, more physician's assistants, more nurse practitioners, and that's something the state has to address if we're going to get...
Is that state subsidized?
It can be state subsidized, and it should be. We're right now recruiting doctors through the National Health Service Corps, but the state is going to have to meet more of their obligation in those areas also.
We got about 30 seconds, Mr. Burns.
I was at the same press conference this morning supporting a Healthcare Bill of Rights. I think it is terribly important that we not sit on the sidelines in Illinois and wait on the federal government. We've got to make certain that we have uniform standards And we've got to make certain that doctors and patients and that relationship is very carefully protected so that patients will have access, reasonable access to such things as emergency care treatment, specialists, that we have a system where we have disclosure so the patients know what they're getting into, and we have a grievance procedure. And I have pushed very hard for an ombudsman program so that we can cut through all the bureaucracy and have a grievance procedure.
Thank you. I see our time is up and we can continue our conversation over the credits. But first a word from Paul Green of Governor State University, who is here this evening in his capacity as treasurer of the City Club of Chicago. Paul?
The City Club of Chicago was happy and proud to co-sponsor tonight's Democratic Gubernatorial Forum. On behalf of the City Club of Chicago and WTTW, I want to thank the candidates for their participation. The City Club of Chicago hopes to co-sponsor a similar round of debates during the final campaign. Finally, I want to urge you, the viewer, to vote on March 17th in the party primary of your choice. Thank you.
And Paul, thank you, and Tom Roser and Jay Doherty of the City Club for all your help in co-sponsoring tonight's Democratic Gubernatorial Primary Forum and last night's U.S. Senate Republican Primary Forum. And our many thanks to Jim Burns, Roland Burris, Glenn Poshard, and John Schmidt for sharing their views and answering our questions this evening. I'm John Callaway. Thank you, and good night.
Great.
Glenn, thank you.
Great, John.
Thank you very much. Good, thank you. Thank you. You guys got a lot.
Stay on the set. Stay on the set. Don't leave. Stay on the set. Don't shake everything you do.
Probably have another 15 minutes.
Well,
it went fast.
Got a lot of ground covered tonight.
It went fast.
You got, I think, about 15 issues to cover. You did. And you did a nice, you had depth.